Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we're talking addiction and the distortion of self in David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. Ha! No, only joking, we're talking Battle for Azeroth and these cool AF new Zandalari Troll druid forms. But not just that, as the title for this video will have given away. Okay, because let me explain. We specifically did not want to make a video about the new Zandalari Troll druid forms. Cool as they are, and they really are cool, it's this kind of thing which is the exact reason why the weekly reset exists. Because they are cool, they are awesome, they are worth looking at, but they're just, in the grand scheme of things, a tidbit, a small update to what's coming in the new expansion. And that's exactly why we have a weekly show, so we can put all of that stuff together. We don't have to go chasing the hype, chasing those sort of like first look views and things like that on something essentially quite insubstantial. We like to have everything together. And this isn't a video specifically about those forms, although we are going to look at them, but rather it represents the latest example in an argument people are having about Battle for Azeroth, namely, are the Alliance getting the short end of the stick when it comes to the new allied races? It's a conversation that has been getting louder and louder as the weeks go by, and I've got a new feeling that with these new forms it's about to get quite a bit louder again. And whereas we don't have time for the weekly reset to write a proper essay video with all the fast cuts and memes and things like we often have at this time of week, I thought it was worth a Taliesin talks on the subject. So in this video we're going to look at and discuss whether the Alliance are getting a raw deal when it comes to the allied races, whether more effort is being put into the Horde versions, whether that even matters, and what the Alliance could possibly have coming their way, if indeed there is anything that can match this. So let's look at the allied race situation before anything else, because it is one of the main selling points of Battle for Azeroth. Despite all the game mechanics and new story developments, new zones to explore, class changes, there's something so visual and so instant about the allied races. It's something that caught people's imagination right from the off. It's a reason people logged back into the game after long absences. It's something that people are genuinely really hyped about. People love the idea of new races to play. And yet right from the off, there were murmurings of discontent from the Alliance side that they weren't getting as good a deal as the Horde players. Because Zandalari Trolls were a much requested and super cool race. HIghmountain tauren, whereas only being a small difference on the classic cow tauren, they were also obviously undeniably uber cool. The Nightborn, who plenty of Alliance players still can't reconcile with the fact that they don't get access to on the Alliance, going to the Horde side is still a major bone of contention. And then you look at the races that the Alliance get access to. They have Lightforged Dranei, who are like Dranei, but a bit more white. And granted, they have really cool beards. Like, Lightforged Dranei beards are amazing, but you could argue that there is even less distinction between a Lightforged Dranei and a normal Dranei than there is between a HIghmountain tauren and a cow tauren. Then you have the Dark Iron Dwarves, who are kind of like the Alliance version of the Zandalari Trolls, a race that faction had always asked for and always had romantic yearnings to be able to use as a playable race. But it could be argued that no matter how glowing and fiery and awesome looking their beards and clothes are, they are still essentially just recoloured dwarf models. Whereas the Zandalari Trolls are their whole own new thing with a different posture and a different skeleton and different animations. Zandalari Trolls are a recognisable difference from normal trolls, whereas Dark Iron Dwarves are essentially just recolours. And then you have the Void Elves. Now, whereas the Nightborn were a faction that we are incredibly familiar with throughout Legion, Suramar is one of the greatest max level zones in the history of World of Warcraft, in my opinion. I love the storytelling there, I love the fact that it even exists, and of course, in my opinion, the best raid in the whole of Legion, the Nighthold, was us liberating their city for them. We have a history with the Nightborn, whereas Void Elves, they are literally just made up. And yes, they look cool. They're all purple and stuff, and they've got glowing hair, and they allow Alliance players to use Blood Elf models. But there is, because of that lack of kind of familiarity with any kind of lore, and because of this nagging feeling that they were made up on the spot to fill a gap rather than anything else, there is something that surprisingly rings a little bit hollow about Void Elves. And I'm surprised that I'm saying that myself. It's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And of course, the biggest crime about them is that they're not High Elves, but I don't really want to get into that now, and I don't think you do either, okay? So there's an argument, a pretty partisan argument, it has to be said, that just right from the off, the Horde have got the better deal with the starting allied races. And that's before we even get started on the fact that two of these Horde allied races can be druids. And druids means new forms as well. Now, it was exciting enough when we had the HIghmountain tauren forms, and those are just like the normal forms, like a bear, but with moose antlers on. A bear with moose antlers? It's horrific. It's nightmare fuel. It's wonderful. I love it. The fact that they turn into a moose for their travel form, I am sold. I'm in there. That is brilliant. The kind of fun that you can have with a new race that the Alliance couldn't have by fact that they didn't have any druid options in their new allied races. And then we get to the Zandalari Troll druid forms, which have just been kind of data mined and put on the usual sites. And speaking of nightmare fuel, this is the new Zandalari Moonkin form. Now, to have a new Moonkin form, which is this distinct, this personalized, this unique, is a major coup for Zandalari Trolls. Now, opinions on how this thing actually looks are kind of moot, because obviously this thing is ugly. There is no way that anyone except the most masochistic Zandalari players is ever going to use this. In fact, apart from the sort of the morbid curiosity of it, the best thing about this form is that inscription prices will go through the roof, because now Glyph of Stars is even more mandatory than it was before. There's only very few players that are going to use this. I mean, it looks super cool when it's not really doing anything, but it's those wings, isn't it? It's those wings on the arms, which you and I both know are going to be incredibly unsatisfying when it comes to like casting animations and things like that. It's just not going to feel quite right. But that's not really the point. The fact is that the model itself is incredible. It's high res, it's stunning in its ugliness, and it exists. A lot of effort from an incredibly talented model designer went into this. And whether or not you actually like it, that's the point that needs to be made here. Likewise, the Zandalari travel form and flight form, which we've seen before, just cool and dinosaur and unique, but this is the one that really seals the deal for me. This is the one that just knocks it out of the park completely. And it's so obvious when you think about it, but it still took me by surprise when I saw these models. But it's just beautiful. No bear form for the Zandalari Trolls, of course. You have this ankylosaur instead, which is just brilliant. I mean, that is something else incredible. Like, it looks great, but also just the idea behind it. And this is the thing, it shows imagination, it shows like a genuine love of the race that they're working with, and a desire to kind of like explore that and discover cool things about it. And that's why this works. That's why this is so cool. And then you look at where that's represented in the Alliance side, and it's harder to find, because there is that lack of joy of discovery in the Alliance Allied races so far. Lightforce Dranei, like I say, are super cool, and they've got those really nice tattoos and stuff like that, which look great. And their beards, though, seriously, their beards are something else. But there is nothing in those Allied races of this standard, and of this uniqueness, and of this just drop-dead coolness. Now, this does come with a caveat, of course, because we know next to nothing at the moment about the Dark Iron Dwarves. And who knows, that could tip the scales, that could completely change everything. They could turn out to have like shaman effects, which are just off the scale amazing. Blizzard could even just turn around and say that they can become druids and give them forms comparable to this. But it feels unlikely. There's just not as much scope for anything as cool as this in the Dark Iron Dwarves. But we don't know that yet, and that's something that we can say about the Alliance side of Battle for Azeroth in general. You look at the zones of Zandalar at the moment, and they are much more developed than their Kul Tiras counterparts on the Alpha. There's just more stuff there. They're further down the process of designing and implementing, and there's still a lot more to come on the Alliance side. Having said that, I can see why people are starting to get a little bit worried. And then there's the slightly awkward fact that, as well as being subjectively a little bit cooler and having had a little bit more time and effort put into them, there's literally more Horde allied races than there are Alliance ones, because we only know of 3 Alliance allied races at the moment, but we know of 4 Horde variants, because of course the Horde have the Mag'har orcs, the uncorrupted orcs as well, from what looks like it's going to be alternative universe Draenor. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Taliesin, you criticised Dark Iron Dwarves for being recolours of the dwarf model. These are literally just recolours as well, aren't they? And yes, that's true. You're completely right. They are just recolours. but what recolor? Because the options that you have for the Mag'har orcs from a customization point of view far outweigh any other allied race. The different variations and skin tones and, yes, hairstyles that you can have as well allow you to make your uncorrupted orc pretty much any of the existing tribes from Draenor, which is a level of customization which is unsurpassed from probably any other race in the game. I don't think it's unfair to say that uncorrupted Draenor orcs will have more customization options than all of these other allied races put together, and that in itself is really, really great for Horde players. And that's before you even get started on the fact that uncorrupted orcs are something that Horde players have genuinely been crying out for forever, since the very beginning of the game, more so than Dark Iron Dwarves, more so than Zandalari Trolls. Even if you didn't have all these brilliant customization options, just having uncorrupted orcs, even if they were just brown skin, that would be enough. That in itself would be one of the coolest allied races you could possibly have, the most obvious choice for an allied race you could possibly make. But the fact that you have all this customization on top, it's just cool. So therefore, I think that subjectively, in my personal opinion, the Horde races that are being made available for allied races are cooler, are better, are more satisfying than their alliance alternatives. I think there's also an argument to be made that the Horde allied races are objectively better in that they've had more effort, more time, more resources put into them than the alliance versions as well. So I think if you did want to make an argument that the alliance are currently getting the raw end of the deal when it comes to alliance races, I would listen to that argument and I would say you probably have a point. But then I would ask this question: does that actually matter? Do things need to be fair on both sides? If I as a player only play Alliance, can my enjoyment of this game still be enriched by these new Zandalari Druid forms? I would argue that yes, absolutely they can. I'm not going to play a Zandalari Druid, but I'm so glad these exist. My enjoyment of the game is increased by the fact they exist, even though I'm probably never going to play one. And from my point of view as a player, I would much rather that the designers and the devs have free reign to create things that they feel invested in and that they think are really cool without having to worry about evening it out on either side. A really good example of this is the cinematic that we got in Legion on the Alliance side, which came at the end of a short quest chain that Alliance players got to go on, which Horde players didn't, which took you to Stormwind, you talked to Anduin, he got into skies, you went through the broken shore, he found his father's sword, and then you got that cinematic which showed him kind of coming to terms with his father's fate. Lots of stirring music and discovering our feelings and alliance-y things like that. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to have that available to Horde players as well. The Alliance and the Horde have been working very closely together. That was kind of the whole point of Legion. It wouldn't have been too weird to have Horde players also be able to find that compass, also be able to do that quest line, also be able to experience that cinematic. And if we're talking just from terms of balance, then they probably should have been allowed to. Really, if we're honest, it's better that that was an Alliance-only thing. And yes, you can make the argument that that was unfair on Horde. The Alliance had a whole quest chain with a whole cinematic and a whole heap of artifact power that they got from it as well, which at the time was quite important still, believe it or not. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. That slight imbalance, it didn't affect anyone's game detrimentally. It just made it cooler for the people that experienced it. And I dare say a lot of Horde players that never experienced it either don't care or are still glad that that exists and that there is that kind of level of storytelling still in the game. I don't want there to be an obsession with faction balance when it comes to just cool things that you put in the game. To be honest, there's still a part of me that wishes that only Alliance could have Paladins and only Horde could have Shaman, because it's kind of cool that you have those differentiations between the factions. Now, I say this as someone who has the opportunity and the time, because of this channel, to play this game maybe more than your average player, and as such, I have every single class at max level and ready to raid, and within that mass of characters, I have a pretty even mix of Alliance and Horde, so I get to see both sides of this. So I guess it's much easier for me to say, like, I don't mind if only the Alliance get this thing and only the Horde get that thing, because I know that if I want to, I can experience them both. And I'm fully aware that not every player has that luxury. And as such, your opinions might be completely different on it to mine. And that's fair enough. There's also the argument to be made that in Battle for Azeroth, Blizzard is really doubling down on this whole faction identity thing. Everything about it, from the announcement to the cinematic trailer to the way they're talking about it now, it's all geared up towards faction pride. Who are you going to fight for? Are you for the Alliance? Are you for the Horde? Wear your colours, show your affinity. 2 different starting islands depending on your faction, 2 completely different storylines to play through. Massive things happening in lore which are designed to make you angry for your faction. If you're an Alliance player, you're going to be angry that Darnassus has got burned to the ground. You're going to be angry if you're a Horde player that you've lost the underbelly, these big seismic events in your faction history. You are losing things which are established and which are important to your faction. Blizzard are doing this on purpose. And there's an argument that in an expansion which focuses so much on that kind of stuff, that focuses on faction versus faction and which side the player chooses to be on, there's an argument that actually it's more important for Blizzard to keep things fair in that case, in the amount of things they give to each faction. Maybe more so than in other expansions. Because if Blizzard are saying, choose your side, have pride in your faction, and then they go on to completely dick one of the factions over, if you've chosen to play that faction, you'll have legitimate cause to be a bit upset about that. I can understand that too. And there's also the thing, which is maybe unintended, but maybe intended from Blizzard. I'd like to ask some of the devs about it. I'd certainly like to ask Ian about it as well. Despite all of this pushing of the faction identity and choosing your side, the actual result that it's had on me is that it's made me more proud of my Alliance characters and my Horde characters. When I saw that cinematic trailer for Battle for Azeroth, like most people, when Sylvanas turned into the Banshee and she landed and she shouted for the Horde, I was almost on my feet screaming for the Horde. And even though I do play both factions, the majority of my history and my playtime is with the Alliance. If I had to choose a faction that I felt more affinity to, I would probably have to say the Alliance. And yet there I was, screaming for the Horde with everyone else. It was fantastic. And then, of course, you have Anduin doing his angel, beautiful, crying face and making everyone happy, and Gen Greymane being a very good boy. And straight away I was back in the Alliance camp and I was shouting for the Alliance. And for me, there is no way that I will not be playing both factions in Battle for Azeroth, knowing how different those experiences are going to be, and knowing how much emphasis there is on the different faction pride and fighting for your faction, that actually makes it more likely that I'm going to play both Alliance and Horde than it would have done otherwise. In the same way that I still don't know if I would actually have one of each class at max level if it wasn't for Legion's focus on class identity and spec identity, because I found that really exciting. I wanted to get all of those artifact weapons. I wanted to play through all of those Order Hall campaigns, so I had characters of every single class. It's something I'd never done before, and I enjoyed the experience so much that I got them all up to level 110. The focus on faction pride and identity in Battle for Azeroth is having the same sort of effect on me, but wanting to play Horde and Alliance. So actually there's something even more inclusive about it. But what if you are a player who either only has time to play 1 or 2 characters and so has them all on the same faction, or what if you do identify with one race or faction to such an extent that you couldn't even countenance playing the other faction? If you are a die-hard Alliance player who would only ever play Alliance and who has only ever played Alliance and can't even imagine playing Horde, do you have a legitimate right to be upset about allied races and the seeming imbalance of work that has gone into the Horde side as opposed to the Alliance side? Well, when they put it like that, maybe you do, because whatever they end up doing with Dark Iron Dwarves, they're going to have to be pretty cool to be anywhere near as cool as Uncorrupted Mag'har Orcs and all the vast array of customization options that they have, and these new Zandalari Druid forms, which are off the scale, imaginative, and brilliant. So maybe you do have legitimate concern. Then there's also the interesting point that if you genuinely think that these Zandalari Druid forms are that much cooler than anything the Alliance has to offer, if you are genuinely bowled over with the customization options that the Uncorrupted Orcs have compared to anything on the Alliance side, maybe you're playing the wrong faction. If you look at these Zandalari Troll models and go, oh my goodness, this is the thing that speaks to me. Playing these things would make me so happy, and it's so unfair that the Horde have them and the Alliance don't. Maybe you are deep down a Horde player and you just don't know it. And you know what? That's okay. There's absolutely nothing at all to stop you playing a Zandalari Troll. You can do that. The world won't end. All will be well, and you get to play cool dinosaur forms. Result. So that's my opinion. I'm not too fussed on the idea of a perceived imbalance between the factions. I think overall everything works itself out in the end, and I kind of like there being slight imbalances here and there, because I think it helps with faction identity and differentiating between the two factions. So I'm kind of behind that. But working on the assumption, and I think it's a fair assumption, that Blizzard will try and even things out, and will try and make everything fair, and will give each faction as much as they give the other. One of the main questions of this video rears its head, in that, what could the Alliance possibly have that would match the cool factor of these Zandalari druid forms, and indeed the uncorrupted orcs as well? Well, the obvious answer is to make the Dark Iron Dwarves super cool. They already look pretty cool with their burning beards and glowing eyes and things like that, but so far they have nothing that could ever reach the coolness of turning into a dinosaur to fight baddies, because they don't have a druid form. Unless Blizzard pulls out what would be a pretty shock move and turn around and go, oh, do you know what, Dark Iron Dwarves, we decided they can be druids after all, and give them some amazing, like, rocky, magma-y, lava-y, glowing druid forms. That would be absolutely awesome, and something I would definitely play. I think it's probably quite unlikely. Maybe Dark Irons could be given something completely unique to them, in the way that Zandalari Trolls have something which is completely unique to their own race. I've heard the idea of Dark Iron Fire Paladins being mooted around. So they're paladins, but they're fire paladins. So even though they use the light and everything, it's kind of magnified by the fact that they're Dark Iron Dwarves, and it kind of expresses itself as fire. So there wouldn't be any mechanical difference, just like there's no mechanical difference with these druid forms. They would just have their own unique set of graphics and animations. So instead of, say, throwing the standard Judgment Hammer, which all other paladins do, it's a Dark Iron Hammer with, like, fire coming out of it. And instead of, like, the standard Consecration animation that other paladins have, it's like writhing lava and volcano effects everywhere. That would be pretty cool. Arguably as cool as Zandalari Troll druid forms. Arguably no more development time or work than these models called for. I think that would be a really cool idea. And I think it's something that the Alliance allied races really kind of need and deserve at the moment. And then there is the potential of the other races that could come into the Alliance and be playable races for them. Because like I say, at the moment we have 4 Horde allied races on the table and only 3 Alliance ones. So what is that missing race that we don't have on the Alliance side yet? Well, the smart money is on Kul Tiran humans or Vulpera being added as allied races for the Alliance. I think Kul Tiran humans are probably the most likely of that scenario and would make a really great option because they are incredibly unique. You have bear humans, big, thick-boned, incredibly strong looking, who would clearly make incredibly satisfying tanks and warriors and things like that. And then you have the skinny human variants as well, who at the moment only exist in male form, but again are an incredibly unique option for people to be able to choose. And now, of course, Kul Tiran humans, they're just humans, aren't they? I think a large section of the player base would be quite put out if they were added as an allied race rather than the models, say, being enabled in the standard human customization. And I think that's a really good point. I'd like to see them added to the standard character creation as well, but I just don't see that happening at all. I think if we get Kul Tiran humans, they will be their own separate allied race. And I think that makes sense as well. It fits with the way that the other allied races are being added to the game. So Kul Tiran humans would be super cool. They have completely unique models. They are incredibly distinctive. They are something that would be completely unique to the Alliance that the Horde simply wouldn't have. I think that's what the Alliance really need at the moment. And then there's the question of Vulpera. And I think the community is kind of split 50-50 on their either absolute love and want above all else for playable Vulpera and their complete hatred for the idea. And it's easy to see why. It's easy to see how this is a race that would divide opinion like that, because they are super cute to like a JRPG ridiculous level, and you're gonna love and hate that depending on what your inclinations are, I guess. Now for me personally, there's a part of me that would love to see them added as an Alliance race. In fact, when I saw them, I instantly thought, yes, here is an Alliance race for the allied race system. I'm gonna play one. It's gonna be really cool to see them everywhere. You're gonna have a fox riding the fox mount. All is well with the world. But that was before my experiences with the Void Elves. Now, hear me out on this, because I think it's going to be an unpopular opinion. When Void Elves were announced as an allied race, there was a part of the community which said, well, this is stupid, this is ridiculous, this is a made-up thing. You've made this up just to get the Blood Elf models onto the Alliance side and used with the Alliance. And that's true, clearly. I don't think there's been much more thought put into the Void Elves than that. I feel like the lore behind the Void Elves has been created to allow them to be used as playable races rather than the other way around. And I feel like with all the other allied races, all of that stuff was in place, and established, and these were genuine races that existed in the world that found their way to becoming allied races. And I think Void Elves are the only ones that were created specifically to become an allied race. That is a distinction, and it was a distinction that I kind of dismissed at first, and I didn't think it really mattered, because Void Elves look really cool. They've got cool glowing hair. They have a cool voidy effect that happens to them. In that respect, they are unique. But, and I don't say this very often, internet, I think I might have been wrong, because I was really excited to start my Void Elf character, and I did. I started two. I have actually race changed my Hunter to a Void Elf, and I've started a Void Elf Warlock to level up for the Heritage Armor as well. But do you know what? Leveling that character up, I've realised that I just don't connect with it in a way that's never ever happened to me with any race kind of class combination that I've ever played on Warcraft before. There's just something about the Void Elves that don't ring true for me, and it's because they were essentially just created to become an allied race. Now, lots of people don't feel like that. Lots of people really connect with their Void Elf character, but I think there's just as many people who are like me, who no matter how hard they try, can't find that connection with them, which surprised me, I have to admit. And my worry would be that that same thing would happen with Vulpera, or indeed any other race that just got added into the game in Battle for Azeroth. My worry would be that if it's a race that we've just come across, like the Vulpera, maybe the Kul Tiras humans as well, to a degree, although the fact that they are humans kind of negates that, and the fact that they are Kul Tiras humans with this rich history that we all know about, have known about for years and years and years, and we've all wanted to see this, and Jaina Prowlmore's connection with them and stuff. I think that's enough to get Kul Tiras humans out of that bracket. But I think with Vulperan, Tortolan, I think any of these new races that are just being introduced in this expansion, my worry would be that no matter how cool I think they are, and Vulpera and Tortolan are both really cool, and I think I want to play them as allied races, but my worry would be that they would have that same effect as the Void Elves. And because they're so new, and because I've never experienced them in game before, and because there'd always be that nagging little doubt in the back of my head that the only reason they're there is to give the Alliance allied race options that they otherwise wouldn't have had because the Horde got all the cool stuff, my worry would be that, like with the Void Elves, I wouldn't be able to connect with them in the same sort of way. I'd be really interested to hear your opinions on that, because it's a realization I've just come to in the last couple of days when I've been thinking about what other races the Alliance could get. So I think I've talked that out as much as I wanted to. I believe that no matter how much cooler I may personally believe the Horde allied races are from the Alliance allied races, I also believe there's objectively more options and more work and more unique things about the Horde allied races than there are the Alliance versions, and I think that's a fair point to make. I don't necessarily think that is something that has to be evened out. I don't believe that Alliance and Horde players have the right to demand that everything one faction gets, they should get a version of that as well. But I think when it comes to the actual work that's been put into like these amazing troll models, I think it would be a shame if there wasn't a similar amount of work put in cool new things for the Alliance as well. Not from a sense of evening things out, but just from a sense of the more cool stuff there is in the game, the better the game is. Even if I never play an uncorrupted Mag'har Orc, my experience of the game, even if I only ever play Alliance, is going to be enriched by the fact that there are so many more different types of Orc players running around. But of course, I am going to play an uncorrupted Mag'har Orc, and I still have months to get my Tusk of Manaroth just to really nail that transmog as well, you know? And so whereas I find the whole kind of getting upset at the idea of Blizzard faction bias one way or the other, I find that a bit childish and a bit pointless, and as you might have guessed from some weekly resets episodes, a little bit funny as well. I don't think there's anything wrong with hoping that an equal amount of work is put into creating cool things for the Alliance, and I think the key to it lies in creating unique cool things for the allied races. So the reason the Zandalari Trolls are so great is because they're Zandalari Trolls and they're awesome, but also because they have stuff that no one else has. These druid forms which are completely unique to them, and it feels like more special as a result. If Dark Iron Dwarves had something like that, something that went beyond a fiery beard and glowing eyes and cool heritage armor, something like the idea of a fire paladin with its own animations separate from other paladins, that's the kind of thing that I want to see allied races have. And it wouldn't matter to me that Horde didn't have a fire paladin that they could use. It wouldn't matter to me that Alliance don't have a dinosaur druid that they could use. It would be enough for me that those cool things exist in the game, on their own separate sides. And they even themselves out in their own separate ways. I guess what I'm saying is it would be fun to see the same amount of effort and care put into each faction with regards to allied races, rather than seeing a direct alternative of each thing for each faction. But what do you think, guys? Are you a livid Alliance player who feels cheated and like you're being completely conned out of all the funness of allied races? Do you think that the Alliance have the best allied races? Are you upset that Zandalar currently have no paladin option? Do you think this entire thing is the most childish conversation anyone could possibly have if the Alliance are getting the raw end of the deal at the moment? What could even up those scales? What cool things could the Alliance have that could ever be as cool as dinosaur druid forms? I genuinely want to hear your opinions on this, guys. So let us know in the comments below what you think. And thanks for joining us today. I'm sorry it wasn't one of our more traditional essay videos with the memes and the cuts and things, but I like a nice Taliesin talks every now and then. If you did like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make these videos happen. Guys, without you, none of this channel would exist in the way it does, so thank you. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Studen Albatross. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evertel. Until next time, cheerio.